Have you ever wondered why your footage looks flat, even after you've fixed the white balance? That's because you've corrected and not created. Today, I'm going to show you how to build 4 cinematic looks in DaVinci Resolve, step by step, so that you can finally color grade with intention and not with guesswork. Let's get started. Okay, so essentially, I'm going to help you understand what correction is versus grading. I'm going to explain look development as well. I'm also going to briefly explain LUTs. I'm going to help you kind of understand the basic kind of workflow order for color grading. And then also, finally, we're going to develop 4 different creative looks in a demo. Okay, so let's start by clearing something up. Correction and grading are not the same thing. Correction is about fixing problems, getting exposure right, balancing color, making the image look neutral and accurate. Grading, however, is about style. It's about giving your footage a specific mood, a specific feel, and you're always correcting first, then you're stylizing with your grading. And each step in the process builds on the last. Okay, so when you're developing a look, you've got to start with references. So you're going to pull stills from films, from commercials, or maybe even photography that inspires the mood that you want for your project. You have to decide on a color palette and contrast. Are shadows cool? Are highlights warm? Is saturation muted? Is it vibrant? And you're always going to protect your skin tones. People should look human, even if it's a stylized grade. You may also want to test a few variations and see what direction works best for your project or for your story. So the next thing I want to talk about is using LUTs wisely. So LUTs can be powerful, but they're not a magic bullet, right? There are 2 main types of LUTs, technical LUTs and creative LUTs. A technical LUT is going to transform log or raw footage into a usable color space like Rec 709. I actually think a color space transform in DaVinci Resolve is a better tool in my view now. A creative LUT, on the other hand, adds style. Maybe teal and orange, or kind of a vintage fade look, for instance. The key, though, is to never rely on a LUT alone. My advice is to apply it and then refine it with other techniques. You should think of a LUT as a starting point, not necessarily the finish line. Okay, so here's a safe workflow order. Start with an IDT, which is an input device transform, and that converts the color space to DaVinci Wide Gamut to give yourself, the most detail to work with. Next, you're going to correct, you're going to fix exposure, you're going to fix your white balance, you're going to check your saturation, contrast, etc. After that, you're going to add a creative LUT, or you're going to do a manual creative grade to style your footage. And then you may refine that with something like a power window or some other technique that you decide to use to get it exactly right, exactly how you want it to look. And using this workflow order allows your creative grade to sit on a solid foundation. The last kind of step after all of this is to finish with an ODT, or an output device transform, to normalize your footage back to your delivery color space, like for instance Rec 709. Okay, so let's get into the demo now. I'm going to take you through using IDTs and ODTs. We're going to create an orange and teal look. We're also going to create a dreamy look, a sitcom, kind of high-key sitcom look, and a horror look as well. Let's jump right in. Okay, so here we are in Resolve. I've got 4 different clips here, and we're going to go through how you can create a few different looks on these clips. What I've also done is I've built out my node trees for each of these clips, and we're going to start with this first clip, which we've used before in previous tutorials as well. So you'll see I've got my balance, exposure, contrast, saturation, I've got my skin tone node, and then I've got a node for my look, but I've also got 2 nodes, one at the beginning and one at the end. The first one called an IDT, or an input device transform, and the last one is an ODT, or an output device transform. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to Effects, we're going to search for Color Space Transform, and we're going to drag and drop that onto this first node, this IDT, And what this color space transform is going to allow us to do is it's going to allow us to convert the color space of the clip from essentially from one color space to another. So this clip was shot with a Sony camera in S-Log2. So we're going to go into use color space. We're going to search for Sony S Gamut, and we're going to search for Sony S-Log2. So depending on what camera you shot it on, so for instance, if you were to say have shot on a Canon cinema camera, you would choose Canon. Let's go here. Let me just show you. You would choose Canon Cinema Gamut, and then you would go to Canon Log and select the flavor of Canon Log that you used, whether it was Canon Log 2, or Canon Log 3. But I shot this on a Sony camera, so I'm just going to leave that alone. And then your output color space, you're actually going to set this to DaVinci Wide Gamut and then DaVinci Intermediate. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to work in a much wider color space. So essentially you are converting the Sony color space to DaVinci Wide Gamut, and you're going to work within that color space, and then you're going to convert that in the ODT from DaVinci Wide Gamut to DaVinci Intermediate to your output color space, in this case, which is going to be Rec 709 and Gamma 2.4. And you'll see that it's taken us from this to that. So we've now gone from a flat kind of grayed out looking image, which was shot in log, to a much more accurate Rec 709 image. And what I'm quickly going to do now is I'm going to just go through and do all of my primaries and secondaries corrections, and then we'll get to building a look for this image as well. So I'm just going to do that quickly. Okay, so now I've done my primaries corrections. So I've gone through color balance, exposure, contrast, saturation. I've refined skin tones there a little bit. Now what I want to do is I want to build a look, or essentially a creative style or a creative look for this image. And the first one I'm going to take you through building is an orange and teal look. And that is a look that was maybe made famous by kind of Hollywood blockbuster films. I'm going to build a very basic version of it right now. So what you're going to need to do is, the first thing you're going to need to do is warm up the midtones slightly. So I've selected my look node, which is where I'm going to build my creative look. I'm going to go to the color wheel here under gamma. I'm just going to move this just a touch towards kind of orange. Okay, and it's kind of like a minor adjustment. If I just do a before and after, you can see I've just kind of warmed the image up a touch. And then I'm going to go to the color wheel under lift, and I'm going to just move that, and that's towards teal, and that's just cooling down the shadows. Okay, so as you can see now, I've created that look. I've added a little bit of kind of orange/yellow into the midtones. I'm just going to move that up a touch. Add a little bit of blue into the blue or teal into the shadows. It's kind of like an orange and teal look. But if you notice, I'm going to turn that on and off. It's kind of affected our skin tones, which we don't really want to do. We want to protect our skin tones, but we still want to give it a more stylized look. So what you can do to protect the skin tones is on this look node, you can right click and say add a node, add a layer node, and that adds a node underneath. It's kind of like a layer. I know that it is underneath right now, but it's essentially placed on top of the image. And what you can do is you can take the alpha channel, which is this little blue box here of the skin node, and feed it into the alpha channel of the layer node. And what you'll see is that that now protects the skin tones. So if I was to turn this layer node on and off, you can see that the skin tones are far more accurate now. They're protected. They're not affected by the look. It's the rest of the image that's affected. So we've created a very basic orange and teal look, and we've protected the skin tones as well. So let's move on to this next shot. And this is a shot that was provided to me by a student in the program that I teach in. He's in second year. He's also in audio and video production 3, but he's not in my section. He's in a different section of the class. But he shared this clip with me, and he asked me if there was a way that we could make this look kind of dreamy and glowy. So you can see I've created my balance, exposure, contrast, saturation, primaries nodes there. And I've created a node at the end here called glow. So I'm just going to go in here and make a few primaries corrections to this image first. Okay, so now we're going to get to creating kind of like a glow, kind of dreamy effect for this clip. So I'm going to select the node that I want to work in there. I'm going to go up here to effects, and I'm going to search for this little search icon here for glow. I'm going to drag that and drop it onto the node, and you'll see that the effect opens up here. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to go to the advanced controls. I'm going to open that up with this little arrow on the side, and I'm going to change the composite type, or make sure that it is changed to soft light. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to the top, and I'm going to play with this shine threshold slider. So when you move this to the left, you grab your shadows, and when you move it to the right, you grab your highlights. So I'm going to move this around until I get it to a point where it feels like it's maybe shining a little bit. So maybe somewhere around there. Okay, the next effect I'm going to play with here is spread. Left kind of gives it a dreamy feel, and right is more of kind of reality. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of drag it left until it feels like it's a little bit kind of glowy. Let's leave it kind of there. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do then is I'm going to go to the gamma slider here under color and composite, and I'm going to just lift that up just so I'm kind of brightening the midtones up a touch. I might go back to spread and just play around with that a touch just to make things maybe a little bit more dreamy. I may also then just go under saturation here and kind of just pull this down and maybe just kind of dial things to taste. And, you know, if you really saturate it, maybe it looks a little bit dreamy. It's completely up to you, depending on what it is you want to do when you're making your shot look kind of dreamy. So I'm going to just kind of leave that there. Okay, and then one other thing that I'm going to do, not in the glow effect, is I'm going to go down to the curves. I'm going to go make sure I'm in hue versus hue. I'm going to move over to the image. I'm going to select the greens. Let's just widen this a touch. Let's just move that. I want to make it a little bit kind of more fall looking. You can kind of just play around with that color. And I'm going to just kind of before and after. And that's how I would approach making the shot look a little bit dreamy, kind of how Liam asked me to. And you can just play around with some of the parameters in that glow effect. And that glow effect is something I think that's only available in DaVinci Resolve Studio. Okay, and the next thing I want to do is I want to move over to this third clip. And another look that some students asked me about creating was a kind of like a high key, kind of sitcom-y kind of look. So that's what we're going to use this clip for. You can see that I've created my primaries correction nodes already, secondary corrections, and then I've got a node for my look. So I'm going to go ahead just quickly and do my primaries and secondaries corrections. Okay, so I'm back and I've made my primaries and secondaries corrections. There's my skin tone node. And what I'm going to do just to protect those skin tones is I'm going to add a layer node, and I'm just going to connect the alpha channel there so that protects the skin tones from any kind of look that I create. So the first thing I would do to create this kind of a look, like a high key kind of sitcom-y look, is I'd make sure that I maybe raise the shadows a touch. So I'm going to go under lift here. It's going to bring the shadows up a touch. We don't want anything that's too dark. I might also just push gamma up a touch just to brighten those midtone areas. Remember, I'm working in this look node right now. The next thing I will do is maybe try reducing the contrast just a touch, just to keep the kind of tonal range gentle. You don't want too much contrast in an image like this. So I might just dial it back to like 0.95. And I might also just lower the pivot ever so slightly just to see what that's doing. Somewhere between kind of 0.35 and 0.45, or maybe leave it around there. Okay. The next thing I do is you want kind of like a neutral, pleasant color balance. So what I might do is just go under the temperature slider here and just warm things up a touch. Let's go about there. Might also push the tint a little bit towards pink and maybe do a slight saturation boost as well. So I've made that 55. Yeah, you know, sitcoms often lean a little bit towards kind of warm whites, maybe slightly pastel colors. It's maybe not quite natural, but close enough that it looks natural, but not too stylized as well. And then the other thing that I would maybe do, which we've actually done here, is make sure that the skin is preserved. on top of what we've created. And I think that's essentially what I would do for kind of like a high key, kind of sitcom-y type look. It needs to be warm. It needs to be bright. So just play around with, maybe like we did, lifting gamma a bit, lifting the shadows so they're not too close to that bottom line. And then just ensuring that things look natural and kind of neutral, warm and inviting. That's why we've kind of warmed up the image a little bit under temperature and tint. But that's how I would go about creating kind of like a warm sitcom-y type look. Remember, you've got to do your primaries and secondary corrections first. You need a good base to work with, and then you move into the look. And you can use a layer node to protect your skin tones, because you always want to protect your skin tones. Okay, and then lastly, I want to take a look at this last shot. And I've already built my node tree for now. So balance, exposure, contrast, saturation, skin tones, and then a look node there. And what we want to do with this clip is we want to create a horror type look. Okay, so I'm going to go and just quickly do my primaries and secondaries corrections, and then we'll get to the stylized or creative look. Okay, so I've done those primaries corrections. I've done my secondary correction on the skin tones. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a layer node. So go add node, add a layer node. I'm going to connect the alpha to this layer node just to protect those skin tones. And I'm going to start to work on my look for this shot. First thing I'm going to do, let's just bring up the waveform, is I'm going to go under lift here, under to the exposure slider. I'm just going to drop my shadows down. I'm going to drop gamma down as well, just to pull down those mids, just kind of darken the image up a little bit. I might just increase contrast a touch as well to 1.2. I'm going to drop my pivot as well, somewhere around 0.3. That looks pretty good. Just by playing with kind of the exposure, bringing things down, and the contrast, we've gone from that to that, but we're not finished yet. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to cool the image down. So I'm going to go here under temperature, and this is just a very basic look. I'm going to cool the image down. I'm going to introduce a bit of blue here, really cool it down, make it feel kind of isolating. I might also just grab tint here and move that a little bit towards green. Okay, and I actually might also just go under lift here in the shadow specifically and push that towards blue as well. Really kind of blue, make things quite blue. Might just play around with maybe pushing a little bit of green into the highlights. Okay, and what we're going for here is kind of like a cool, damp, kind of eerie, kind of maybe moonlight kind of look. She's kind of isolated in the corner of her kitchen there. And you can see if I just turn this look on and off, we've gone quite far in making this quite eerie. And if I turn this layer node on and off, you can see how much we've protected those skin tones, which is bleeding a little bit into, I guess, this countertop here that's also kind of brown, but that's okay. It's kind of similar hues. I mean, it might be a stylistic choice to not affect or not protect the skin tones. I most likely would in this case. It also helps to make the character kind of pop out in the frame. But you can see we've done quite a kind of stylized look here. Okay, so one last thing I'd like to do here is I'd like to add a vignette to the image just to kind of darken the edges and have the audience focus a little bit more on the subject in the middle. So I'm going to select the layer mixer here. I'm going to say Alt-S or Option-S on a Mac. I'm going to rename this node vignette. Now what I want to do is I want to go down here to the Windows section, and I want to create a circular power window. So I'm going to click on that button. I click on the circular power window, and then I grab these little blue circles, and I just need to make it the size of the frame, and then these pink or red ones kind of feather the edges. So I'm going to just kind of pull that back. And then what you do is you have to go down. Right now, it's going to affect whatever is in the center. So you have to go down here to this button over here, and you need to ensure that you essentially invert this. So now if I were to bring down the gain, it's going to darken the edges of the frame. I'm actually going to also go over here and just turn this power window off so I can actually see what it's doing. So I'm going to just darken those edges, I might just bring down the midtones as well. And if we turn that now, that vignette on and off, you'll see that it's kind of focused our attention more on the center of the frame. It's darkened those edges. I might just bring up that power window again, maybe just feather things a little bit more, turn it off, and then I might just not make it as pronounced. There we go. Control D, and it's just kind of focused our attention more on the center of the frame. So now what I'd like to do is I'd like to show a kind of a complete before and after, kind of showing us where we've essentially come from and where we've moved to. So here's our complete before. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to turn off this look node. I'm going to turn off the vignette. I'm going to turn everything back on. So that's our kind of primaries and secondaries corrections. And then I'll turn the look back on and the vignette back on. And we've done an interesting little kind of eerie horror look for this shot. Okay, so the last thing I want to quickly show you is how to use LUTs. And you'll see that I've actually duplicated this shot at the end. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to just, on the second version of this shot, I'm going to disable the vignette, and for the look, I'm actually going to right-click and reset that node grade. And now what I want to do is I'm going to turn on LUTs, and you can see that I've got a whole host of LUTs here that I could apply to that node. So I'm actually going to go down here. I know I've got some horror LUTs somewhere near the bottom. I'm going to scroll down. There are the horror LUTs. So I've actually done my corrections. So I don't need to use LUTs for, red log or canon log or any of these. I actually need to use the standard LUT, which is for, I think, Rec 709. So I've done my corrections so I can use that LUT. So I'm going to go in there, and you can see that we've got a whole host of different LUTs here. And as I just scroll over them, it kind of just auditions kind of what they look like. Crimson Peak, Friday the 13th. Let's just scroll down. It Follows, Insidious. I'm just going to find one that's maybe a little bit different. Let the right one in. That looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to drag that and drop it onto that look node. Okay, so I've added that LUT to that node, but what if it was perhaps a little bit too harsh and I wanted to dial it back a little bit? So what you could do is you select the node that the LUT is on, you go down here to the section called key, it's this one over here, and where it says key output, if you drag that back, you'll see that it's dragging the intensity of that LUT back. So you can see it's at 0 now. It looks exactly like it did after my primaries and secondary corrections. And now if I drag it back to 1, now the LUT is applied. But yeah, you can essentially dial the amount of that LUT you would like to use to taste. One last thing I want to show you is actually where the folder is that houses your LUTs. Okay, so if you go to File, Project Settings, and you go to Color Management, and then you scroll down here to look up tables, and you open the LUT folder, and this shows up. This is essentially where your LUTs are housed. And if you ever purchase any LUTs, or if you're a student in the program that I teach in, I give my students a whole lot of LUTs. This is the folder that you would copy the LUTs into. And then once you've copied those into this folder, you can then close that down, click Update Lists, wait a little bit, and then click Save, and you'll have a whole lot of new LUTs there available for you to use. Okay, so I just want to go through a few common pitfalls here. One is skipping correction before applying your creative grade. If you don't create your look on a solid base, it's not going to work correctly. The other one is incorrect skin tones, and that means that your creative look has affected the skin. You're going to want to use a layer node like we did in the demo to protect those skin tones. And then finally, the last one is mixing too many looks in one scene or sequence. You want to pick a direction and commit to that creative look. Okay, so that's creative color grading in Resolve. Now you've got that full workflow, and if you stick to it, your projects are always going to look professional. Thanks for following along in this series. If you enjoyed this video and this series, please subscribe and I actually think you might like this video as well. I'll see you there.